The German philosopher Hegel once said that when regarding history as the slaughter bench at which the happiness of peoples, the wisdom of states, and the virtue of individuals have been victimized, the question involuntarily arises, to what principle, to what final aim these enormous sacrifices have been offered? I think that's a question that many people ask themselves today. What is the point of all of this senseless brutality that this world has to offer? For some people, they find solace in the idea that an omniscient God who has a final plan, he just hasn't shared with us yet. And all we can do is to bow our heads, accept our fate, endure the pain inflicted upon us in this world, so that we can live a life of harmony and happiness in the next world. In reality, the answer is far more simple. The barbarism that we see in the world is solely down to the narrow interests of a tiny class of leeches and parasites who live off of the labor of the vast majority of humanity. That is the capitalist class. My name is Hamid Alizadeh. This is Against the Stream, and I'm here today with Jorge Martin, and we will be tracing some of this barbarism in this present world today to their root causes. Now, starting off, we're going to deal with Gaza because the war in Gaza has started again. Israel has started the war. Mm-hmm. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what's happened.
Yes, about 10 days ago, a week ago, Israel decided to unilaterally break the ceasefire. In fact, they had already broken some of the agreements on the ceasefire. They had cut off all entry of aid into Gaza. They had suspended electricity and also water supplies. But about 9 days ago, they decided to restart the bombing campaign. And in just one day, if I'm not wrong, about 400 people were killed, including a large number of children. I think it was 180 children amongst those 400. This was one of the deadliest single-day results of the Israeli genocidal campaign in Gaza. And this obviously came as a big shock to people in Gaza. I mean, the situation prior to that wasn't very good, but at least they had a little bit of a respite from the actual bombing and the murderous campaign on the part of the IDF. This has not yet escalated into an invasion, but there are ground operations going on, and it seems it's building up in that direction, and it's really terrible again. Now, the first thing that we need to say is why did this happen? And it's clear that despite all what you read in the Western media, they try to blame Hamas. Hamas is not doesn't have a negotiating position. Is resisting the proposals. But in fact, the actual bottom line is that Israel has broken the terms of the ceasefire deal that they themselves signed. Under pressure from the incoming Trump administration, but also with the blessing of the outgoing Biden administration. Anyway, a deal was signed at the beginning of January, which included several phases. The first phase of the deal was completed with the exchange of hostages and prisoners and the partial withdrawal of the IDF. But Netanyahu never had any intention of going towards the second phase of the deal. Negotiations for the second phase were supposed to start 30 days after the beginning of the first phase. And the second phase involved the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and a definite end to the war. And this is what Netanyahu doesn't want. And therefore he proposed all along to extend the first phase, i.e. that the exchange of prisoners and hostages will continue, but they will never reach the second phase. And this makes absolutely no sense to anyone. First of all, I mean, it's a breach of something that they had signed. But secondly, why would Hamas hand over the hostages?
There's 59 hostages left.
There are left. When this will not be an exchange for an end to the war. It makes no sense whatsoever why they should accept that. And in any case, Netanyahu decided to break the ceasefire. What is the reason? It's clear that he doesn't want an end to the war. And we have said from the very beginning that his own personal political survival of Netanyahu plays an enormous role in this war, because he knows that once the war is over, he'll be put on trial. He is already on trial, but the whole process will accelerate. There will be new elections. He'll be removed from power, most likely, and that will be the end for him, his political career. He might end up in jail. We don't know. So that plays a big role. But that's not the only factor. There's a big internal crisis inside Israel. Netanyahu has just removed the head of Shin Bet, the secret service, a man called Bar. And this is related to a judicial investigation into what is known as Qatar Gate, i.e. the people close to Netanyahu's inner circle were receiving corruption money from Qatar. This is all being investigated. And obviously, the continuation of the war, the resumption of the war in Gaza plays into the hands of Netanyahu. He thinks he can get political gain from that. There are obviously other factors involved, but this is a powerful factor. And this goes to what you were just saying at the beginning. What is the meaning of this? In whose interest is this being carried out? And here we have the general interest of the Zionist ruling class in Israel, but also the particular interests of this one man.
Yes. And his reactionary supporters.
Yes. Because this is the other point, that by resuming the war, by restarting the war in Gaza, he's now got the far-right elements from his former cabinet to come back into the cabinet. That one of these parties, Ben Gvir's party, left the cabinet when he signed the ceasefire deal, and now they return to the cabinet. So he now has a majority to pass the budget. Otherwise, the government will fall. And also to pass all these other measures about the political control of the judges, the dismissal of this high-ranking intelligence official. So he's now got a sound government coalition. And he doesn't care about what's happening in Gaza in the interest of his narrow political aims.
As you say, the Ben Gvir's party had left the government when the ceasefire deal was struck, and they said they would come back again if the war resumed, because as far as they're concerned, they're only satisfied with the complete removal of the Palestinians from Gaza. And Netanyahu needed it, as you say, for three purposes. Today, they just passed a law that allows Netanyahu to change, or the prime minister, to change the judges who have been a thorn in the side of Netanyahu. The judges generally in the past period have been controlled by the dominant wing, by the majority wing of the Israeli ruling class, who has tried to bring down Netanyahu because they saw Netanyahu as a destabilizing force. Which is true. As we can see, he's destabilized the whole country by launching these wars and many other things. And the same with the budget, which, as you say, was passed yesterday, was it, or during this week? And if it hadn't, the government would have fallen, and Netanyahu would have stand a slim chance of being reelected. So all of this is precisely for a very narrow basis of the individual interest of one man and a range of people. Now, I just want to read out this report from Middle East Eye on the 18th when the bombing started. This is one of the reporters was in Gaza. And it's called Israel Resumes Gaza Bombing, and then in quotation marks, one of the most terrifying nights of the war. And what this guy writes, I mean, the whole thing is very much worth a read. But he writes, the house was shaking. Everything inside fell and broke. It was impossible for any children or adults to stay calm. It was terrifying. What made it worse was not understanding what was happening. The strikes kept coming, one after another, like a continuous fire belt. The children, like my 5-year-old niece, are asking, Why is this happening? Why are they bombing again? Didn't they stop the killing? Why has the bombing returned? Now we're just trying to make sure that what little food is left in the market will last a few more days. Power and internet outages are making it even harder to keep in touch with people. We're living in fear and confusion as if we're back in the early days of the war. For 3 or 4 hours after the initial attack, I stayed terrified. Even now, my legs hurt from the shock. It was so sudden. We tried to discuss what we should do next as a family. We decided to go to the markets in the morning. My sister would go to one, I would go to another, and my brother-in-law to a third. We hoped to find something, but there was nothing available. The situation is getting worse and prices have doubled. A kilogram of sugar, which used to cost 4 shekels, is now 50 shekels, around $13 or $14. Even prices of vegetables like tomatoes are soaring, and we can't even keep them fresh without electricity. The markets were full of panic. There were elderly people, children and others scrambling to buy whatever little they could before the goods ran out. For the past 12 or 13 days, this is before the bombing, we were living in a famine. Now with the escalation of bombings, the situation has only become worse. We don't know what to do. This isn't just a political or military attack. It's the killing of innocent civilians. Most of those martyred overnight were children and women. We don't know if we'll survive or not. If the army invades, we don't know where we'll go. We want the war to end and for peace to return. We want the border crossings to open. We want basic human rights, food, security, shelter. Right now, all we can do is wait, afraid of what's to come. We don't even have the time to cry or express our feelings. We can't endure the war again. But it's clear we're living through it once more. And this time, it's far worse.
Yeah, and this is a situation in which 2 million people live in Gaza.
Yeah.
People who've already gone previously through 15 months of this
incessant bombing.
Yes.
The water supply of Gaza is down to 7% of its pre-war situation. There's a massive famine because all of the supplies have been cut for weeks. Sewage, hundreds of thousands of tons of sewage every single day, without anywhere to go, is poisoning the water areas. You know, the Mediterranean Sea nearby, and it's just hell on earth.
And this is only the beginning now, because all reports indicate that the next phase of this, whatever you want to call it, second stage of the war, is now going to be a ground offensive that they are preparing. And this time more openly even than in the past, with the idea of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip.
They're going along. They're using Trump's comments from a few weeks ago, where he said that he was going to, America was going to take over Gaza. The Gazans had to be cleared out, and now they're actually
carrying it out.
Trying to carry it out. Yeah. Whether they succeed or not is another matter. Now, there is another part of this, which is inside of Israel. The war has already had a huge impact. This was one of the reasons why the war stopped, because besides the fact that there was pressure from Trump, who came in and who wanted to be seen as a peacemaker, and in general, I think he sees this conflict as a danger for his interests, or this destabilizing matter, or for the interests of U.S. imperialism. But there's also an internal crisis. There's a economic crisis. The Israeli army is made for rapid, very short bursts of blitz war. The 6-Day War is one of the famous ones. But here you had hundreds of thousands of reservists being called up for months and months at a time. Even the limits which are in place for the amount of rotations that you do were far exceeded. And what you saw is actually, we've covered this before, I think you and I talked about this in this program, that people started, in the beginning, there was a clear idea that we're going in there to save the hostages. But what everyone realized now is that Netanyahu doesn't care about the hostages. There's still 59 of them there. they could have come out. Let me just see. 73% of Israelis prefer a complete end of the war with a withdrawal from Gaza. 60% of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign. Amongst the IDF soldiers, we've seen lots of reports that people don't know what's the point of this war. What are the aims of this war?
Yeah.
What are we killing for? What are we dying for? What are we losing our jobs for? Because most of these people are working class people, middle class people with jobs who are giving that up. This puts enormous pressure on their families. Again, to what end? To what final end?
There have been reports of fighter pilots and intelligence officers and other people who are conscripted into the IDF. They say, we're not going to serve under these conditions because it doesn't make sense at all. According
to Ynet, in some units, a reservist call-up was down to 60%. This was 100% in the beginning of the war. It means everyone was called up, showed up. But now you basically have a form of desertion in a way, that people just refuse to come, refuse to serve. And I think the point is, this is the problem of capitalism, that it's a system that's ruled by a class of people who primarily act in their own individual interest. That each capitalist, even though they can there's a class that can agree to run a nation, but in the end, each capitalist fights for his own profit, for his own privileges, and competes against everyone else. And it's precisely this that means that you have an anarchic system which can't be controlled. Everyone agrees we need stability, we need peace, we need, just for business sake, if anything. But if you guys are willing to make the sacrifices, and here you have that playing out on a political level, Netanyahu, for his own political survival's sake, sacrificing and destabilizing the whole country, in essence. Israel is now deeply divided. There's been demonstrations of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people against Netanyahu, against the firing of the Shin Bet, the head of Shin Bet. This is not a progressive or revolutionary left-wing protest, but it shows the deep divisions which are being fermented, and also the whole of the region. Because what is this going to lead to? This is continuing the destabilization underneath the surface of countries like Saudi Arabia, of Egypt, of Jordan, Iran, Qatar. All of this has a huge impact on all of these countries. And also the US. We saw actually, this was one of the reasons why Trump was elected, was because people had enough of the forever wars and of the warmongering of the Democrats. Now Trump is giving his stamp of approval to this war, and we're going to see the same thing developing. Those Arab communities that voted for Trump have already swung in opposition. They've arrested a whole series of people or individuals who
participated in the Palestinian incumbents last year, but they are foreign nationals and just violating all the rights, freedom of speech, freedom of political expression, freedom of demonstration. They're now being held by ICE, immigration enforcement, and with the idea of deporting them.
What's that going to mean for
is that freedom of speech that Elon Musk and Trump are going on? But in relation to Israel, this is completely true. Netanyahu wouldn't have restarted the war had it not had the green light from Trump. And in reality, Trump's whole ideas about how to put an end to this conflict are now clashing with the reality of something that is more difficult to solve than a New York real estate deal. This is the thing. So not only Trump is fully behind Netanyahu in this new genocidal campaign, but I will say also the European Union, the European powers have talked mildly about perhaps war crimes, but even they're careful about their language. The UK, British Foreign Affairs Minister David Lammy said that some of these actions might constitute war crimes, and immediately Starmer said, no, you must tone down this. We're not lawyers. He is a lawyer in any case, but we're not lawyers. We can't decide. It's not for us to say whether there's a war crime. And you see, when it comes to Ukraine, they are organizing a summit, which we will talk about later. They're organizing summits and promising ammunitions and coalition of the willing. Where is the coalition of the willing to defend the Palestinians? This is a clear-cut case of the so-called international law is being violated. A ceasefire that was agreed is openly being broken. And all the European powers are doing is some mild statements. No, that's not the only thing they're doing. They continue to arm, support, and fund the Israeli state and the Israeli army carrying out this genocide, not doing anything again.
Yeah. Now, speaking of hypocrisy of the Europeans and the West, we saw how all of the protests that were taking place in Israel were barely ever covered in the past year in the West. Even the protests that was the mass protests in the West were barely covered.
Yes.
In the last few days, we've seen a whole series of a series of smaller protests, nevertheless not insignificant, in Gaza with several thousand people participating. This has been all over the Western news. First of all, portraying them as these big
a rebellion of the Gaza people against Hamas.
Against
That's what
Hamas,
they're saying.
Exactly. Now, how can we explain this these protests?
Well, first, just to say about this hypocrisy that you were mentioning, I mean, in some countries, like in France, right at the beginning, pro-Palestine demonstrations were banned, completely banned.
Yeah.
In Germany, there's still heavy repression against anyone saying that they are in favor of Palestine and against
Even
Israel.
if you wear a Palestinian
Kefir. Our own comrades have been put under court cases. There's 3 cases, and there's many other activists in Germany simply for supporting Palestine. So it's completely hypocritical of the West now to highlight these demonstrations in Gaza. But however, we need to explain why are these demonstrations taking place and what is the real meaning. If you look at the slogans are mainly about we want an end to the war. Is what you were just describing from this witness from Middle East Eye. We want an end to the war, and it's completely understandable. And many of these people in these demonstrations, however big they are, can't have exact details. I mean, there are 2 million people in Gaza. A few hundred, perhaps, have been demonstrating, or a few thousand even. They also saying that Hamas must step down because they make a direct link. The West and Netanyahu is saying, and Trump is saying, Hamas cannot remain in power in Gaza. And even Hamas has partially agreed to this idea that there should be some sort of technocratic administration to put an end to the war and so on. So this is the link that they are making. The only way to end the war. I mean, these people in Gaza, they cannot put any pressure on Israel. They cannot put any pressure on the West. The only people they can put pressure on is their own government in Gaza. And if they think they think foolishly, I will say, that Hamas stepping down will put an end to the war. That's some of the demands that are coming up. Obviously, Gaza is a place with 2 million people. There's all sorts of political opinions. Some of them might be supporters of Fatah, which is a rival faction, obviously, and they will like Hamas to step down. But what I will say is 2 things. One, the Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister cynically has encouraged these demonstrations. So these are the people they've been massacring. I think it's 50,000 people have been killed in the last nearly 2 years. And now they encourage them to demonstrate. And I think there was even a case where they said, you must evacuate from this area other area is safe. People went to this other area, they had a demonstration. They were bombed in that...
they gave them areas where they could protest. And then they bombed those areas.
Completely cynical. Obviously, Israel doesn't have the interests of the democracy or the right of protest of Palestinians at heart. Everyone knows. I mean, they just nearly lynched. They basically lynched This person was a film director who won the Oscar.
Yes.
He's been lynched by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And then, as he was being taken in an ambulance to hospital, he was then kidnapped by the IDF, arrested and beaten up. So this is the... Anyway, but that's one side of the question. The other side is that I think that even if Hamas was to step down and say, okay, we're no longer in government in Gaza, which is completely undemocratic in any case, because I mean, they've been elected, right? So it's for the people of Gaza in a democratic election, which certainly cannot take place under these conditions, to decide. But even if they were to step down, this is not the war aim of Israel or Netanyahu or even Trump.
They want to cleanse
They
Gaza.
have said that they want to destroy Hamas. They want Hamas to disarm and leave the Gaza Strip, which is completely, I mean, is an aim that cannot be achieved, as proven by the 15 months where they tried.
And I would say, I got 2 points to add to that, and maybe we can continue. But one, even if they, you see, the idea that Hamas is an arbitrary phenomenon is completely wrong. Hamas represents, in whatever shape it has taken, the oppression. It reflects a response to the oppression of the Palestinians. That is what it. And if you get rid of Hamas, some other organization or some other formation or phenomenon will arise to reflect that, because what's actually happening is a one-sided, decades-long war against the Palestinian people who want to defend themselves, and they have every right to defend themselves by any means that they see necessary. And if, as you can see, the only means is the most violent ones. That's the only ways that they can provide some sort of defense, at least. Having said that, there is a lot of criticism of Hamas. I don't think
there was before this,
even before this
invasion,
thing.
yes.
Hamas has run Gaza with a very hard hand. Hamas is at the end of the day. This is not relevant in this conflict, but at the end of the day, it's a reactionary organization. It does not have the interests of the Palestinian peoples at heart. However, we see here how who does the Palestinians have to defend themselves? Who do they have to defend themselves? There's nothing else. And by
what's happened, in fact, the Israeli intelligence recognized this, that rather than destroying Hamas, this 15-month campaign, the first phase of the war.
That's a massive recruitment drive for Hamas.
That's right. 10 or 15,000 people joined Hamas.
But there were also, what I saw on Twitter, I think you sent me a post, someone was saying, actually, a lot of people going out there seeing that this is falling into the, Israel is picking up on their protests and their demands.
Trying to
capitalize on it. It means that fewer people would actually go. Because in a charged situation, polarized situation like this, you're either on one side or the other. And the Palestinian peoples are not on the side of Israel, which means that this is actually, Israel is actually strengthening Hamas in every single way, even in relation to those who in other times would not.
For the first time.
Exactly. That's the whole history of it. I mean, the Israeli ruling class have bragged many times how they nurtured Hamas, how they brought it into power as a convenient scarecrow for the Israeli people in reality. But that's a different question. I think we should continue, but we have to, we'll monitor the situation in Gaza and we'll come back to it. Right now, Gaza is not at the center of world politics, in the sense that what happens in Gaza at this particular moment is not affecting everything. But there is another conflict, which is right at the center of everything that happens in the world, from the economy to the military plane, or to the diplomatic one, which is the conflict in Ukraine. And here we've seen negotiations in Saudi Arabia between the United States and Russia, which led to a deal on effectively a ceasefire in the Black Sea. The Russian call it the revival of the Black Sea grain initiative. And at the same time, there's been a further formalization of the ceasefire on the energy grid, which has which have been quite significant. In particular, the Black Sea Initiative is a deal which guarantees, which secures that commercial shipping can peacefully go through the Black Sea. And this will also mean that Russia can use these areas and, as a part of this deal, also to generally export its
food and fertilizers.
Now, Russia is one of the biggest agricultural producers in the world and one of the biggest, if not the biggest, fertilizer producer of the world. That's a huge thing. And in order to do that, they've had to open. They've said that they're going to open international payment systems, which is probably the SWIFT system, to Russian banks which trade with these kind of agricultural products, which in essence,
and also make sure that Russian ships transporting agricultural products are going to be insured by Western companies.
So Russian access to Western shipping insurance agencies, which is a very important part of shipping. Russian access to the Western banking system.
Payment
system. The lifting of Russian sanctions on a significant part of Russian exports. It's not the major part, that's still gas and oil, but a significant part. And all of this is a huge reversal. And in reality, this was all in these two spheres, in the energy sector, on the question of attacks on energy grid, and in the Black Sea. Russia has seen all of its demands accepted entirely. And the Ukrainians haven't gotten much. In fact, the problem in the Black Sea, this was one of the few areas where the balance of forces was slightly tilted towards the Ukrainian, in the sense that Ukraine had lots of cheap Navy drones that they could just sail into Russian ports and blow up. They blew up lots of ships, lots of Russian warships. Amongst those was the Moskva, which was a big, very, very big ship. Not that it really made a big impact on the war, but this was one sphere where Ukraine had a certain parity with Russia. And now that can't happen anymore. That's covered by the ceasefire. The grain trade was already taking place in Ukraine. Russia was already allowing it to happen because lots of their allies, India, Turkey, all of these, were dependent on grain coming from Ukraine and commercial shipping from Ukraine reaching them. So in essence, all this means is that Russian interests have been protected now in the Black Sea, and Russia's got access to the sanctions.
And I will also say that
relief from the sanctions.
I will say that this is a first step in that direction. That one of the things that the Russians want from any talks or any settlement is precisely a return to the world market and an end to sanctions. So this provides a test case on how to move in that direction.
Now, speaking of deals, Trump and deals, Trump in the Middle East, he thought he could just make a deal. But he realized that there are social forces, which are much more powerful than any deal you write on a paper. But here we have real social forces which are reflecting themselves in a deal. In the West, there's a big uproar against all of these concessions that are being given to the Russians.
Yeah, they're saying that basically that Trump is a Putin agent, more or less, that Witkoff is just repeating Trump's and the Russians' talking points. But in reality, what is happening, if you look at it from a cold place, in a cold manner, is that Russia is winning the war on the front, and therefore any agreement has to be based on that. That's a starting point of any negotiation.
Exactly. You have to base yourself on reality. The problem with the West, and we'll get to the coalition of the willing and all these things. The problem with the way that Western imperialism was acting before was precisely its refusal to accept that Russia was winning. And insistence, again, this doubling down idea that any attack, any setback, any challenge to Western imperialism must be met with a doubling down of force, you know, in every way that they can.
At the time when the West, or particularly the United States, was no longer able to hold the line that way,
Exactly.
they had to play. They were unable to play a key role in the Syrian civil war.
Yeah.
They were forced out of Afghanistan and now Ukraine, but they still refuse to recognize reality, as you say.
This is a reality that came out of the post-Soviet order, where the US came out as the sole superpower on the planet. And it got to their heads. That's something that can happen to the ruling class. They believe their own propaganda. You know, I was giving a speech last weekend, and I was saying, you know, it was back then, it was all about Michael Jordan, Pepsi, Michael Jackson, you know, Western democracy, liberal democracy. You had, wasn't it Bush Senior? Then you had Clinton, arrogantly strutting around the world, wading into one country, you know, Iraq once,
Mission accomplished.
twice, 3 times. We invade Afghanistan. We break up Yugoslavia. We send people to Somalia, and thinking that no one can challenge them. And this mentality, and you know, it's like a big mafia boss, essentially. That's the mentality. We are the number one people, and anyone who gives us any challenge, we're just gonna crush them. But obviously, in the meantime, you had the development of China as an economic force and then a military force as well. You had the redevelopment of a revival of Russia as a military force in the last 15 years in particular. And the reality which that assumption was based on changed. But the assumption, it was no longer there, but the assumption remained. So the deal was still there, you can say, on paper. All of the institutions of the West were there. All of the precedences were there of how to act in international diplomacy, just bullying and pushing around people. But suddenly, someone said, no, we're not going to play by these rules. And Ukraine was probably the tipping point of that.
And when people say, they say Trump is a Putin agent. He's just listening to Putin, and he's just using the carrot with the Russians and the stick with the Ukrainians, and then you think, but what is the alternative? And when Trump and J.D. Vance and Witkoff, when they say, the alternative is Biden's policy of unlimited support for however long it takes, and that approach has already failed. It has already failed from several points of view. First, it has damaged the European economy severely because of sanctions on Russian energy. It has depleted the West's stockpiles of weapons, and is not achieved the desired results on the front line. And if this war continues any longer, there's 2 options. Either it escalates into Third World War, as it seemed to be happening in the last days of the Biden regime, or it leads to a decisive victory of Russia. And the longer the war goes on, the more this will be clear. So we're not talking here about what is good or bad from the point of view of the interest of the ruling class. We're talking here about gangs of gangsters on both sides. This is an inter-imperialist war. But the difference is that Trump seems to be wanting to cut his losses and run, while Biden seemed to be wanting to continue and escalate a war that was completely unwinnable. So from the point of view of the U.S. ruling class, this was a mad policy.
Absolutely. And it cost the Ukrainians a heavy toll, but we'll get to that. Just before that, we have our dear Prime Minister, the new Winston Churchill.
Keir Starmer.
Sir Keir Starmer. I'm not sure Winston Churchill was all that either, but that's a different question. The coalition of the willing. He stands up in the wind, shouting out.
Over the last few weeks, it's just been a few weeks, but there's been an inflation of summits, meetings, some online meetings. Now, today they had a conference in Paris, And apparently there were 30 countries represented there. But Macron, in his speech afterwards, he said, well, there's no unanimity. This question of sending troops is just a Franco-British plan. We do not need unanimity.
Yeah.
This basically means that no one else is in favor. But let's now look at what the Brits and the French have actually agreed. First of all, they said we're going to send troops to Ukraine as peacekeepers, and they talked about 30,000 at the beginning. I think then they brought the number down to 10,000. Now, the latest proposal is these are going to be, what do they call them? Reassurance?
Reassurance
Not
forces.
peacekeepers. They're going to be reassurance
It's
troops.
emotional
Some people
support.
say they're going to be outside the borders of Ukraine. Some of the people are going to say, I think Macron said today, they're going to be inside Ukraine, but not near the front. And the people are going to be near the front are going to be UN troops. So this is completely ridiculous. Then they had a summit last week on Thursday, I think, a summit of European leaders convened by Callas, who's the chief commissioner for foreign affairs for the European Union. And she was demanding, she was promising, was it 45 or 50 billion euros of immediate military help for Ukraine in the form of ammunition. Then the figure was brought down to 5 billion, just a 10%, 90% discount, because they couldn't agree. And now her proposal was that this was to be shared according to GDP amongst the European countries. Yeah. But obviously this means basically Germany, Italy, France, and Spain, the biggest in terms of GDP. And then the Italians and the Spaniards said, no, thank you very much. We've already given some money. We're not going to give any more. And there was a big wrangle. This meeting on Thursday couldn't get any agreement on any money, so that was not agreed. Then they couldn't agree on further sanctions on Russia. Nothing was agreed. There was a statement that was released that said, we will consider tougher sanctions on Russia. We will consider in some distant future. This agreement, this statement, was not even signed by the EU leaders because Orban from Hungary objected. So it's just a private statement from 26 leaders. And then they also discussed seizing the Russian assets that they have frozen, some of which are in European banks in Belgium and in other places, to use that money to fund military aid to Ukraine. But they couldn't agree on that because a number of countries, they said, look, this sets a bad precedent. People will not want to deposit their money in the European banks if this happens. So basically, they've had a meeting, then another meeting, and then another meeting, and then another meeting in which they said that the operational logistic plans or operational plans are going to be put in place. And
they reached the operational phase of
the plan. Yes. And finally, after all of this, they have agreed to precisely nothing. And I think that this is very relevant because it reveals the real position of European capitalism in the world scene once they're no longer the allies of the United States.
Exactly. It's a statement of impotence, really.
Yeah, that's right. And there was a report from a British military officer.
Yeah, I have it here actually.
Yes.
Well, before that, I should say Steve Witkoff, Trump's main negotiator, had an interview with Tucker Carlson this week. And he said some things about the Europe. First of all, he said this idea that this warmongering, war hysteria that's been whipped up in Europe, the Russians are coming, we need to rearm, we need to get troops and stuff. He said they don't even want to absorb Ukraine. That's what he said about Russia. He said, why would they want to absorb Ukraine? For what purpose? They don't need to absorb Ukraine. They have reclaimed these regions, these 5 regions. They have Crimea. They've gotten what they want. Why do they need more? Not only are they not thinking about coming into Europe, they don't even want the rest of Ukraine, which I think is true. Mm-hmm. This is not propaganda. He's been accused of being a Putinist and a Putin propagandist. These are the facts on the ground, basically. Then he talks about this coalition of the willing. He says, It's a combination of posture and pose, and a combination of also being simplistic. This is a sort of notion that we have all got to be like Winston Churchill. Russians are going to march across Europe. That's preposterous. By the way, we have something called NATO that we didn't have in World War II. Again, saying this is just nonsense. This is complete nonsense. This is posture. The Europeans that came out outraged at Witkoff's comments, saying, no, what are you talking about? You're a Putinist and so on. He also said that Putin is he spoke very nicely about Putin. He's a very direct man and no one can deny that.
Yeah,
so
well,
on
he's trying to make a deal with him.
Of course, he's sitting there. But then there was an article in the Telegraph a couple of days later, 23rd of March, which is called Starmer's Ukraine Peacekeeping Plan Dismissed as Political Theater, which is another word for pose and simplistic.
Dismissed by whom?
There we go. That's an interesting thing. They interview a few army sources who say that Keir Starmer had got ahead of himself, and this is, I quote: one senior army source said it was not remotely possible for a plan of support for Ukraine to be drawn up in the time we're talking about, which is up until the 2nd of April, which is the deadline that the Americans have set themselves for finally ending this conflict. He said there's no defined military end state or military strategic planning assumptions. It's all political theater. Starmer has got ahead of himself with talks of boots on the ground before he knew what he was talking about, which is why we hear less about it now and more about jets and vessels, which are easier to do and don't need basing in Ukraine. Now, as you said, they proposed a no-fly zone patrolled by British Air Force. And then another person says, it's politics. There's no military sense in it. He added that neither the Russians nor the Americans supported the coalition, which was being led by the UK, and cautioned that the coalition talks were complicated by the fact that no one knows what the mission is. There are about 700,000 Russians in and around Ukraine and over 1 million Ukrainians under arms, he said. What is a 10,000 international force based in the west of the country over 400 kilometers from the front line meant to do? It cannot even protect itself. What is the mission? What is its legitimacy? What are the rules of engagement? How is it commanded, supplied, and housed? How long is it there for, and why? No one knows.
It's for reassurance.
It's an emotional support force. Another defense source added that Keir Starmer was leading from the front. The PM himself went to PJHQ 3 days ago to receive detailed secret briefings on operational planning for the coalition, they said. There is respect across U.S. defense and our allies for this hard work and the hard work of our military in developing what are already comprehensive plans to secure peace in Ukraine. Then we have Ben Wallace.
The hard work of making plans.
Then we have Ben Wallace, who comments on this. This is a previous Minister of Defense. Yeah. Sir Ben Wallace, sorry. He said, this is coalition waffle without any resolve.
Well, he knows a little bit about waffle himself.
And lack of resolve as well. The question for Europe and Britain is resolve, he told the Telegraph. Putin sniffs that we don't have any, which is why he does not take us seriously. Until that changes, nothing will change on the battlefield. He added that recent talks by the coalition amounted to spin rather than one of substance.
He's correct.
Yeah.
But the problem is not that Putin sniffs that there's no resolve in Europe.
Yeah.
The fact is that Putin knows that the Europeans are impotent. Not only they are impotent, they are also divided because their interests are not the same.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is about prestige, isn't it? Both Macron and Starmer, who are pushing this line, they think that they basically think that they're still at the head of imperial powers that count, that have actual clout. When, as a matter of fact, as I think Alan Woods has said, they are pygmies in a coalition of pygmies. They're really small in the world arena, and they are fully aware. They know, Zelensky has said, that European troops cannot enter Ukraine unless they have the backing of the United States.
Yeah.
And the United States has said they're precisely trying to get themselves disentangled from this war, not further entangled.
Yeah.
And here is the quid of the question. I think that one of the reasons why the Europeans are making so much noise about this question of Ukraine, and they are basically today they said that they are against the grain deal, the Black Sea Initiative, and that they will not lift European sanctions on Russia, without which this grain deal is difficult to work out. The reason for all of that is because they want at all costs to maintain the United States imperialism involved in the war in Ukraine, and therefore backing up the defense of Europe, because they know that they cannot do it by themselves.
As long as US is trapped in Ukraine, it will need to have a significant troop and military presence in Europe, which will tie it economically to Europe, not just in terms of defense, but also in terms of maintaining its economic interests and so on. And it will give the Europeans an umbrella under which they are big boys. Mm-hmm. They are imperialist powers themselves to be taken seriously on a world scale. They would strut into Africa and Eastern Europe, anywhere, and they are the boys. They have the suits on. They have the power in their back. Mm-hmm. That is what really American security guarantees account for. Is allowing these guys to be little imperialist dogs for under the.
But that's
wing of
finished
America.
really because under Trump. And Trump does represent a section of the U.S. ruling class who's realized this.
Yes.
Their strategy is as follows. They do not think that they should be at war or at conflict with Russia because they have bigger fish to fry. They think, they consider, and they write in that the main challenge to U.S. domination of the world, or to U.S. primacy, is China. China is the main rival from an economic trade point of view, and therefore they want to concentrate on China and try to disentangle themselves from a fight with Russia, and perhaps break up Russia and China. And so if you think about it, if the main enemy of the United States is no longer Russia, or previously the Soviet Union, what value is it for the United States to defend Europe? Europe is not the theater of this conflict. It's the Pacific. They need to concentrate on the Pacific and disentangle themselves from Europe.
And that's why the Europeans essentially are trying to prolong this conflict, to tie down the Americans. They don't want this to end. They don't want there to be a settlement, which is obviously, which has profoundly reactionary consequences. Yes. Now, that leads me to this article that we mentioned last week. It was published on a website called Medusa, and it's called...
Which is based, just to say, Medusa is like a journalistic operation, which is based in Latvia, I think, or one of the Baltic countries, and is pro-Western, pro-liberal, and I think it used to receive money from US aid and other
a section of its funding was by
other
US
Western
aid.
Agencies. We're just saying that so that to give the viewers an idea of listeners an idea of what's the political slant of this publication.
100% pro-Ukrainian.
Yes.
100% pro-Western.
Anti-Russian.
The journalist called Shura Burtin is not prominent, but he's a known individual, a liberal, clearly openly liberal and anti-Putin person. And he wrote this article. I'm just saying,
which makes the report more interesting.
Exactly. We have just Google translated this, so there might be some mistranslations, but it's an extremely interesting report. It's called "There's Only One Way Out of Here: 300 or 200." Those are the codes that you have in Ukraine for 300 means wounded, and 200 means killed in action. Yeah. And it says, "There's only one way out of here: 300 or 200. Why many Ukrainians do not want to fight. Shura Burtin's report about the new fear of the war that has gripped the entire country.
And this journalist spent some time, a few weeks,
He spent 2 months. 2 months
traveling around Ukraine,
the
which is a country he knows, is reported before. He has contacts, he talks to people.
Exactly. And what he opens the whole report with, I'm going to quote from this, extensively. What he starts with is saying that in the beginning of the war, the main fear, the main enemy was Russia. And there was kind of a drive for unity to fight this the invasion,
mood,
a patriotic mood, a nationalist mood to fight against the enemy, to defend the country. And now he says the new fear, the terror in people's lives is the TCC, which is the
Territorial Recruitment Center.
Yes, which is which are the forces which go around picking up people on the streets and taking them to the front, basically.
Bundling them into
exactly.
vans and sending them to the front.
He says here, he talks about how, he starts off by talking about in Kiev. He says, a year and a half ago, Kiev was rather irritating because it was so far from the war in the east of the country. Now its shadow has clearly moved closer. And he talks about walking around, and there's not many people around town in Kiev. He says, and then there's explosions, rockets. He says, however, more than the arrivals, that's what you call rockets, rocket strikes, missile strikes. He says, more than the arrivals, the military atmosphere in the capital is created by the TCC. Strictly speaking, this abbreviation, Territorial Recruitment Center, means Military Registration and Enlistment Office. But in common parlance, this is the name for military patrols that catch men on the street to send them to the front. Now the TCC is the main word in Ukraine. That's the main word used. Mm-hmm. He says, a patrol stops you, shoves you into a minibus, takes you to the military registration and enlistment office for a medical examination where everyone is declared fit. This process has now become known as, among the people, as busification, which is the second most popular word in the country. The next evening...
Which means people are put in buses and sent to the front.
Exactly, busification. That same evening or the next morning, you're already going to training. This is a military camp in the forest, army tents or dugouts, strict security and basic military training. Now, he talks about how there's been a massive shift in the mood in the beginning, from this patriotic mood. Anyway, he says, one of my friends is a very cool programmer. I assumed that he would be taken into some kind of radio intelligence service. And then he quotes his friends writing to him. He says, who's gonna let me go? It's a slave market. Oh no, sorry, who's gonna let him go? It's a slave market, sighed our mutual friend Valia, meaning the so-called buyers from the brigades come to the training center and take a certain number of units for themselves. So here you have these people being huddled up, basically in detention centers, mm-hmm. and then different special brigades of special forces, stormtroopers, whatever, coming in, pointing out, picking up whoever they think seems more fit and more strong. And that's important because what people don't realize is that if you go into a specialized brigade, you get a longer training. Mm-hmm. So in a normal brigade, you maybe get 2 or 4 weeks training, 2 weeks training. But some of the specialized elite brigades advertise, for instance, in the cities, mm-hmm. they advertise minimum of 4 weeks training. Mm-hmm. You have a less chance of dying. Mm-hmm. That's people. You can't really conceptualize what people mean by this. Then
he also speaks in here about Telegram groups in every town, in every locality, in every neighborhood that warn people about
busification, about the
recruitment
TCC.
officers to avoid them.
Yeah. He then talks about this wave of people who are fleeing the country. There's a mass phenomenon of people fleeing the country, even though there's a lot of shame and guilt and lots of pain and sacrifice involved. This can cost you and your family very, very much dearly economically. And he explains that the long explanation of the flight of one person who goes in the back of vans and all sorts of things, and then he goes at a certain point, he reaches a village, and then he jumps in the back of a garbage truck where he finds 20 other people huddled up. And he says it's what does it say? He says it's thick. The air is thick with moisture and sweat. They finally are dropped off in the middle of nowhere, and they have to cross. He says it's a forest, but in reality, it's a thicket. He says there's endless branches in our face. We have to go through this. Our arms and legs are totally scratched up and bleeding. They're thirsty. They don't have any water. Then they get to the border, and I'm just gonna. This is the Transnistrian border. I mean, there's too much here to quote. I would actually like to read out all of it, but yes. I'm gonna read this. He says, about 5 hours later, this has already taken hours and hours, maybe 10 or 15 hours already. About 5 hours later, we reached the border itself. There was a small forest there, and then the last field to cross. We ran and ran and ran for a long time because drones could detect us. We saw lanterns burning somewhere, and at the border itself, there was these dragon teeth, this anti-tank dragon teeth, made of concrete. They put them up on the Ukrainian side because Transnistria is a Russian proxy. And as soon as we crossed those teeth, sensors went off and lanterns turned on. Some lights started shining on us, and dogs started running and approaching a lantern. This is like a prison escape. That's what it basically. Yeah. Ukraine has become like a prison. And he talks about how they run and run, and it's really dark, and they get to these anti-tank ditches, which are 2.5 meters deep and 2.5 meters wide. And they can't see it because it's dark. So they just fall in, and he just has a dozen or two people falling on top of him. Yeah. They get up, they kind of help each other out of this. And they finally, through all sorts of things, they get to the other side, and they finally cross the border. Sorry, they don't cross the border. They said there's a guy with us who was constantly lagging behind. It seems he had some kind of illness. He had no strength from the very beginning. To be honest, when I saw him, I thought he was really bad. He was having a bad time in the garbage truck, and I tried to get him up in every way. But when we crossed the border, he fell behind. I asked the guys, let's wait for him. They said, we won't wait for anyone. Everyone is on their own here. And he stayed somewhere in the forest. I heard him shouting at us, but we were already far away. I don't know the rest of his story. We crossed this forest, no border checkpoints. It became easy, calm, and we came to a Transnistrian village, houses and a river. A remote village. In one hut, the light was on for the whole farm and nothing more. The hired people who worked in this scheme began to pick us up in groups and immediately gave us water to drink. And this taxi driver says, guys, you were lucky. There were guys in front of you. They were all grabbed by the Ukrainian border guards. Some of them lay in the swamps for 3 days, waiting. And, he says, a week ago, a father and son were crossing the Transnistrian border. Guards shot them both. I mean, this is absolute barbarism. And for this...
We have talked before. Last year, there was some Ukrainian official who said that the total number of people going missing from the front, absent without leave, deserting basically, is about 200,000.
200,000, exactly. And he talks about deserters as well. But obviously, you would think, what are they escaping? And this guy, I mean, his story goes all the way up to Berlin. And he says, well, to be drafted is a one-way ticket. And the idea is basically spreading as to what are we really fighting for? What is the conditions there? Then this journalist goes to the front. He goes to Donbass. And he talks with a combat medic who's called Taras. And this is what Taras says. This is what the report of what things are like at the front. This is Zaporizhia. It says, there was no place where there wasn't someone's body. There was a mixture of the smell of gunpowder, the smell of your own sweat, soaked in adrenaline. It stinks really bad, like urine, and then the smell of corpses. Then, in Rabotino, which is a village that was very brutally fought for, it was the highest point. If we had taken it, we could have gone down towards Tokmak, which is another city. There in Rabotino, we literally had to walk over corpses. It was the end of November, beginning of December. Incredibly cold. The trenches were filled with the bodies of our guys. We tried to pull 1 or 2 out, but it was all a drop in the ocean. You just stop me. I'm just going to go through because I think this is very significant.
Yeah.
We're gonna try to translate this.
I think it's worth it
and publish
because
it on
this is the thing.
Masters.com.
This report is only, as far as I know, is only been published in Russian so far,
Yeah.
and I think it's worth translating
Absolutely.
into English.
Then he goes further near Pokrovsk and he meets a drone crew. Now you would think at the front, a journalist comes, people want to have size him up before they open up. But his friends introduced him. His friend says, "This is Shura. He's a journalist. You can trust him. Do you want to say anything?" And people immediately start opening up. Vitalik, a young guy, about 23 years old with curly hair, suddenly starts speaking very emotionally. He says, most of the management, it probably means the leadership, most of the management is just making money. They don't care about the lives of the fighters. Recently, people were sent in the middle of the day to look for a leleka that was lost. That's probably a drone, I think. Just to say that the middle of the day is the most dangerous time to be outside at the front because there's hundreds and thousands of drones at all times in the air. As a result, 1 was wounded. The medics went to pick him up. An FPV drone flew into them. 1-200, as in 1 dead. A 19-year-old guy, my friend, and asked the guys how the battalion commander threatened them that if they didn't launch the plane, he would come and shoot them in the legs. How many of these planes were lost because they decided to launch it and the weather was really bad? The pilots understand this. And this guy, the battalion commander, has no experience, but he doesn't give a shit. This is what basically...
When you say management is about getting money, there's been lots of reports about officers in the army of different units who are extracting money from the soldiers under them on the basis of fines for, for smoking, for breaking discipline. And if they don't pay, they crucify them. I mean, the whole situation is... And some of them have committed suicide, or some of them have killed their officers. This is the mood of demoralization that's spreading.
Exactly. This Kostya is another drone operator. He says, we were promised the best planes, but this is the army. What they promised, they broke. Boasting about how many combat sorties we've had is like being proud of how many times you jerked off. Here's the important bit. He says, I feel like I'm in prison. All of my ambitions are gone. I realize that I can't overcome all of this. I will do the minimum that I can give. I drive conscientiously. So this is a driver for a drone team. I try not to fuck up. I try to resolve the guys' conflicts because they are endless. I take on humanitarian issues like finding housing. As a human being, I can be useful here. But overall, our use is 0. Well, at least I'll earn some money for now. So this idea that people don't know really what they're there for. Now, obviously, there's a lot of propaganda also coming from the front. People saying you must support us, and there's kind of this sensationalist images, videos that's posted. But it's interesting the background of this, because you would think that the mood is one of patriotism and victory and resolve. But then it says. This is Burtim saying, in the morning, through my sleep, I hear the clatter of a machine gun. It sounds cozy, as if it were protecting me. I want to sleep on. But I ask, what is this? The other person says, the Shaheds are this is the drones. The Shaheds are being shot down. Oh, sorry. This is Burtim asking. This is the Shaheds are being shot down. It turns out that this is a tactless question. Listen, I just don't understand. If you're doing bullshit and suffering, why are you writing on Facebook so that other people can join the Ukrainian armed forces? So he's saying this whole thing is nonsense. The Shaheds are being shot down, but it's just nonsense. He says, "Oh right, well that's how it works. Everyone has to sacrifice something, or maybe the shortage of personnel will make them spur them to change the army. Well, no, it would rather collapse." So it's just cynical. It's no, if we don't get anyone, the army would collapse. But they don't really care about that. It's just going through the motions of doing this propaganda, posting it on social media. But nobody really believes in it. It seems to me that many Ukraine are now behaving like Kostya. They no longer believe, but still agitate. Again, this is coming from a vehemently pro-Ukrainian person. Now, this is a story of Danila, who's a stormtrooper. Stormtroopers are the most battle-hardened, the most serious part of the army. And this guy is deserted after years, and he's really made a big change. So it's asked why, after, he says like how he signed up and he was very patriotic, and it was very important for him to sign up initially. He says, well, why didn't you leave then? Why did you leave then? He says, well, my lads and I were in a house. A magnesium lighter was dropped on us. I think what he means is these kind of incendiary illumination was dropped on us from a drone. They thought we would break in from there straight away. So they set up an ambush to take us down. So basically, they're burning down the house. They're expecting these guys to come out to be ambushed. I took the lads into the cellar. We sat there with one gas mask for 3 of us, and for an hour and a half in thick smoke. One of us was breathing, the other 2 were waiting. There was fire above us. We also had an RPG lying there. It exploded, of course. Sitting in a burning house, red hot, it was fucking hell. And you're just lying on that floor. I realized that we were about to pass out. We jumped out of the fire, hid in the yard, and heard them walking on broken glass nearby. They thought that we were burned. We were all burnt. Dimonchik's hands couldn't move. I whispered into the radio, "Get us out of here. Do something with the drones." Danilo, this is the other side of the radio. Danilo, go to the other yard. Let your guys huddle in the cellar, and we'll come here with new guys for you. I said, no, I'll get mine out, and then I'll start a new group. So the command was not even allowing him to leave. He just said, rotate your guys out. We'll give you new guys, and you go straight back in again. We got out in the dark by a touch. I took the pin out of a grenade and walked around with it for 2.5 hours. I led my men out, burnt, and took another group. And I didn't get to that cellar. And I didn't get them to that cellar. There were 50 meters left. I pointed at it and I said, will you get there yourself? We'll get there, they said. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. This is a very battle-hardened person, but what you see in combat is that people, even the most battle-hardened people, sometimes just suddenly reach a breaking point. And this is where he reaches. It says, I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. And I don't know why they didn't throw a grenade in front of them, even though they were experienced. They just flew in there and they were stupidly shot like kittens. In that cellar, the battalion commander, they were shot like kittens in that cellar that the battalion commander insisted on, and no one suffered for it. The 3 of us were taken to the hospital. We called the headquarters and asked for a paper stating that we were wounding while performing combat missions for payments. But they said, there's no one here to do that now. That was the last straw. I said, guys, if you don't give a shit about us, if they don't give a shit about us, then they can handle it without us. Why the fuck do I need this fucking attitude? I'm a human being. There are 5 of us left in the platoon. We're doing the whole company's work. These assaults every single day, no days off. I'm fucking sick of it. This is what happens when people reach a breaking point, you know. And again, it talks about, I don't think we have time to read this up, but there's a 60-year-old man. He talks about the horrors of how he's been chased down by drones, not having a single minute, how he was bleeding. He's had a nosebleed for 3 days because, I don't know, from the physical shock or from the psychological shock. And this just goes on and on and on and on about the terrifying situation that all of these peoples are in. And you think, for what reason? For what aim? Now, I'll end it with one quote. We might read some other quotes next week or some other week, but there's one quote, one interesting, at the end of it.
Yeah, I think we should put the link to the original
In the description of
Russian,
this show.
and then people can read it through Google Translate. I read it. It's very long, but it's really shocking.
Yeah.
And I'd say, I mean, you're not gonna maybe go to the end of it, but what's more striking is that you can see that this journalist, he is a pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian, and pro-Western. And he's been to Ukraine before, and he himself is shocked at the change in the situation from what he saw before.
Yeah. Just one other, I mean, there's so many I wanted to read out about people who are left to die because they can't get to them. One of them says, one female paramedic explained to me why many of the wounded are so thin. He says, I was driving because of this, you see, there's a problem of drones. The drones have completely changed combat.
That's right.
You can't move, you can't do anything.
Respite.
He says, I was driving a young boy, a very skinny one. He said, I won't eat anything until the hospital. We hardly ate or drank anything for a month, so we wouldn't have to leave the dugout to go to the toilet. So because they don't want to go to the toilet, they just stop
For
eating,
fear of being caught
which is
by the
why they're
drones.
all so skinny. The drones methodically exterminate people. Infantry is shredded like in a shredder, ground down like a pencil in an electric sharpener. The puzzle is coming together in my head. Now I understand what exactly the TCC patrols on the streets mean. Why, where the animal fear of bussification comes from. What the soldiers say is not shown on TV, but people somehow feel it. And then I'll end it with this this one conversation that he records from a train. This is a longer conversation. People can read the whole thing. But basically it's between an old woman and a stormtrooper and a sapper who are sitting on this train. And also this is a new development. The woman is openly criticizing the war, openly criticizing what's going on, saying, why the hell are we doing this? This is nonsense. The other guys are trying to defend the
in many instances, it's women who are at the forefront of defending the men from bussification.
Exactly. And the woman says, listen, do you have a neighbor at home? And one of the guys says, yes, so what? He's an alcoholic. He gets drunk and starts pestering his wife. I went out and I hit him in the head. He says, we will always have, this is a woman who says, we will always have neighbors and we must learn to live peacefully with them. She's implying that they must make peace with Russia. And the guy says, we will never live with the catsaps, that's the Russians, because they are beasts, they are dogs. Have you seen what they do, those videos? How they make ours kneel near the hut in the underwear in winter, freezing cold, and shoot them in the back of the head. Have you seen them? Let them all die. From the youngest to the oldest, all of them. Fill them with concrete and let them all die. The woman says, you speak anger and hatred. If I'm a human being, I should treat all people equally. The guy says, catsaps are not people. These catsaps and buryats, I don't know what they mean, but it's definitely, anyway, it's a curse word. And what about the people in Donetsk who are not Russians, who are Ukrainians? He says, I don't give a shit. A skinny, lanky, very drunken infantryman suddenly hangs from the top bunk. These are Russian-Ukrainian trains where people are bunking. So some guy looks down and says, I don't give a shit. My friend died there. You're in our country. Get the fuck away from us. This is ours. Don't mess with us. I hate you. But clearly this guy thinks that she is a pro-Russian or a Russian person. What do you mean us? The woman asks in surprise. Oh, katsap, you katsap fuck, the guy says. Some other woman says, you're in a public place. Another woman from the side bunk hisses at the soldier. Vadik, you're annoying me, the stormtrooper says calmly. So the stormtrooper defends the woman. I ask you to lie down, please. I can't stand these drunken soldiers. Then the woman says, he probably has a wound in his soul. The first woman says peacefully, we're all sick, but we're not solving our own life problems, but someone else's, which were imposed on us. The worst thing is that soldiers are dying. I think this really sums it up.
Yes.
Other people's problems, narrow, humanly insignificant problems. The problems of the capitalist classes of Europe, of America, also of Russia, who just plunged this country into this state where millions of people fear, these terrible, horrific deaths. And they have to live in this eternal fear. And then we have our coalition of the willing, our, as I said last week, the Danish prime minister going out saying we must continue to the bitter end, crossing any red line.
Spend.
Crossing any red lines, which means provoke Russia.
Yes.
So nuclear response. Obviously, these
or
guys.
Callas, the Commission of the European Union, who says we will win this war.
Yeah.
When is it that the European people have declared war on Russia? Because this is the thing, Hamid. I was thinking about this the other day. We have been analyzing the war, right, and the reasons behind the war. Some people might think, but what is your alternative? Is the Ukrainians don't have the right to national sovereignty and things like this?
Yeah.
And I think that we need to answer that as well. What is the position? Our aim is not just to analyze the real reasons, but analyzing the real reasons gives you a clue, right?
Yeah.
Because this war is not about the self-determination of Ukraine. It's about, as you say, the interests of the ruling class, the interest of the ruling class of Russia, the interest of the ruling class of the West and the United States in particular, and also the interest of the oligarchs in Ukraine. You see, since the restoration of since the fall of Stalinism, the restoration of capitalism in Ukraine, this has been a massive disaster for the people of Ukraine, for the people of Russia, and the rest of the former Soviet Union republics. Massive collapse of living standards, the destruction of cultural levels, life expectancy, everything. And in Ukraine in particular, gangs of oligarchs, the Akhmetov, Poroshenko's, and all these people, Kolomoisky, all these people basically looted state property. They took over mines, steel factories, football teams, whole regions were in the hands of different gangs of oligarchs. These different gangs of oligarchs have alternated in power. Some of them pro-Western, some of them pro-Russian, all of them playing with a national question, which in Ukraine is extremely complicated because there is one section of the ruling class, which is the Ukrainian reactionary nationalists that base themselves on World War II Nazi collaborators that carried out pogroms. And then there's another gang, the pro-Russian, which based themselves on the ancient imperial Russian Empire, Catherine the Great, and all of these myths. And they base themselves on the language division inside Ukraine. And any government that comes to power on the basis of one group against the other will destroy Ukraine, as has been proven since 2014. And the only solution really for working people of Ukraine is to overcome this national division and to unite along class lines. Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking, Romanian-speaking, Hungarian-speaking. There's all sorts of national groups and ethnic groups in Ukraine. And the only way that Ukraine can really exist is by the unity of the working class. And not only the unity of the working class in Ukraine, but brotherly, sisterly relations with the working class in Russia. Not with Putin, who represents the interest of the ruling class, but the interest of the brothership that existed in a distorted manner with the workers in Russia who speak the same language, many of them, or a language that's close to them, that have common cultural background and so on. When is the only time that Ukrainian culture was allowed to flourish? And the first years of the Soviet Union, where Ukrainian language was spread, was codified, and under the Soviet Union, and the interest was not the money-grabbing interest that divides the working class along national lines, but the genuine internationalism based on the respect amongst different peoples. And this was all destroyed. First of all, destroyed by Stalinism, then destroyed by the oligarchs, and finally used in a cynical manner by the United States imperialism and Biden and previous administrations as a battering ram against Russia. And if you do not understand this whole background to the war, then you'll end up with solutions that are not solutions, that don't solve anything.
Yeah.
No one is interested in national sovereignty of Ukraine. No one in Paris, London, Berlin, or Washington. They're not interested in that at all. That's not the reason they're fighting. They're just cynically using the Ukrainian people, the conditions that you described at the front, in order to carry out a war against the rival imperialist power in Russia, in order to weaken Russia for their own cynical geostrategic interest, for the control of areas of influence, markets, sources of raw materials. This is the real meaning of this war. And the only real solution to this war is, one, the Ukrainian people must unite along class lines and rise up against their own oligarchs and their own government that's throwing them into this war that can't be won for someone else's interest. The people of Russia, the workers of Russia, must also take control over their own country, and they will have no interest in attacking the Ukrainian people. But at the same time, they want to defend Russia against a threat from the West, which is completely understandable. And finally, the working people in the West, in the United States, in Europe, we are not interested in this war. In fact, as I think we should maybe touch upon, we are being made to pay. Austerity measures are being introduced in our own countries in order to pay for the rearmament, or what is it? Reassurance of Europe. I can't even remember how it's called now. But the rearming of Europe. In Britain, this week, the finance minister, the chancellor of the Exchequer, she's just proposed a whole new number of measures that increase military spending directly at the cost of payments to the poorest and weakest and most vulnerable people in society, people who receive personal independence payments because of disability.
I mean, absolutely. I think you mentioned a few weeks ago here, I think you were quoting another comrade from Ukraine, who said that Lenin might have created Ukraine.
Lenin created Ukraine.
But it was the Ukrainian nationalists.
The Ukrainian nationalists destroyed.
Because this whole idea of Ukrainian independence, there is no Ukrainian independence. And in fact, there's no prospects of real Ukrainian independence. The Ukrainian so-called independence today means a Ukraine that's an American vessel is being used as a battering ram against Russia in order to attack, and oppress, and eventually subjugate Russia in one way or another. That is what an independent Ukraine, the slogan of an independent Ukraine means today. And that obviously provokes a reaction from Russia, inevitably, which is highly reactionary. And this is absolutely criminal. The only way out, there's no way out on a capitalist basis. The only way out, as you say, is, and as one of our comrades said, Emmanuel from Austria said, it's the revival of the Soviet Union.
That's right.
A real Soviet Union on a democratic basis, with the brotherly coexistence of the different peoples, which would go far beyond the old Soviet Union, because on a basis of a higher level of society, on a more democratic basis, the actual national differences would disappear and would be equalized to a far higher extent. And instead of this barbarism, you could actually use the significant wealth, the intellectual and cultural wealth of the peoples of these areas, and the natural wealth of the area, for the benefit of improving life and creating a good life for everyone, a heaven on earth. If we have to go back to our original statement in the beginning, that actually there is a reason for all of this suffering, and it's called capitalism.
Profit.
It's called private property and the pursuit of profit. And as you say, just to round it up, all of this is being the same people who are causing this situation, this barbarism, who are costing lives and supporting murder on a mass scale in Gaza, in Ukraine, everywhere else, are attacking the lives of working class people in the West as well. As you said, we have these cuts that have been announced in Britain, and there are many, many more to come. This is just the very, very early beginnings of the cuts that we're seeing.
And it's the same everywhere in Europe.
Same everywhere. But I have a couple of quotes that one of our comrades found in different places. This one, I think it's from Reddit, is Dean, 57, from Bradford, has been on personal independent payments for 10 years. This is an attack on the most fragile people who really need support and help in order to be able to function. So if they cut it, I'll lose my car, my independence. I'll just become a house recluse. Everybody knows I'm genuine, but I'm panicking like mad. People know what I've gone through. They know I'm not faking it. They know I'm in genuine pain. I'm on morphine constantly. There's another guy on Reddit. He says, if I lose my money, my arthritic 60-year-old mother loses my support. Right now, I'm using my money to help pay rent, electricity, and gas. I've never been more scared of day-to-day life. The party for the poor might literally leave me destitute. He's referring to the Labour Party. I'm terrified. My benefits are the only thing standing between me and living on the street. Taking the meager amount of money I get isn't going to magically make me not disabled. And trust me, it is meager. With the cost of living crisis, I can afford to exist, but not to live. Well, that's me dead. I'm not being dramatic. I'm profoundly deaf, and I use AIDS. Sorry, I think these are three different statements. Well, that's me dead. I'm not being dramatic. I'm profoundly deaf, and I use AIDS to hear maybe a car horn 1 foot away from me. I use personal independence payments to pay for them. Hearing claims are 1.5% of all PIP claims, so you're not even going to save much money by driving us all to suicide. Now
they are saying that these cuts will immediately
lead to 250,000
people going under the poverty line directly.
Now, according to the BBC, between December 2011 and February 2014, where there were other cuts to disability benefits back then, the equivalent of about 90 people a month died after their employment and support allowance claim was ended. That's 2,300 people. And you can look at all areas of society of how many people die an early death because of these attacks. And not only that, it's just also people who die all but, as in are forced to live a life in constant fear, terror, in constant agony, not having any opportunity to live, be free, and enjoy life, as ordinary human beings. And
the most enraging thing about all this is that there is almost an exact correlation. The government decides the British Labour government decides to send 10 billion pounds to Ukraine, and at the same time they're cutting, I think it's saving, that's the language they use. They're saving 9 billion by cutting the winter fuel allowance from old age pensioners. They are cutting 5 billion from personal independence claims. And they're spending it in what? They're spending it in weapons. They're giving this money to arms manufacturers.
And they want to double that or triple that that amount that they spend.
And then on top of this, there's the question of the debt payments. I think in 1 year, Britain in 1 year spends 100 billion pounds, which is what, I don't know, 120 billion euro. In interest payments. Only interest payments. This is money that goes straight from the public coffers onto the pockets of billionaires, bankers, speculators, and
who have, by the way, already received their money many times over.
who do nothing.
Yeah.
They are parasites. They say, oh, these disabled people, they're not really disabled, they're faking it, they're just lazy, they're sitting at home.
Yeah.
These parasites are sitting at home, the bankers, the investors, and they're just sitting there, clipping the coupons and receiving 100 billion a year just in interest. The whole of the education budget in Britain, if I'm not wrong, is about 88 billion or something like this. It's less money. They're spending more money in paying interest on the debt than they're spending in education. Just to give you one example, this is clear. When we say welfare, not warfare, bombs, books, not bombs, this is exactly what we mean. Is one thing or the other. Yeah.
It's the everyday violence of capitalism, which you can't connect it to a single. In many respects, you can link it to a gun or a bomb, like in Ukraine or in Gaza. But in real life, the working class is paying in millions of lives for what? For the very very narrow interest of this tiny group.
And now the European ruling classes. Because it's not just one, is the different national the ruling class of Germany, the ruling class of France, the ruling class of Britain, they have now decided that since they no longer have the protective umbrella of the United States, in order to maintain their role in the world, because what is this for? This is not in order to prevent a Russian invasion, which is not going to happen. It's in order to preserve the power, the clout of European imperialism, so that they can force Latin American countries or African countries or Middle Eastern or East European countries into submission. They need to spend more in weapons. And this money for weapons is going to be, which is not in our interest. We have nothing to do with exploiting people in other countries. This money is going to be taken directly from our pockets, from the education budget, from the healthcare budget, from the pensions, from the disability benefits, and so on.
Yes, just to round it off, I think the situation is not all hopeless, because as Marx also explained, in doing all of this, in creating these constantly creating these impossible conditions for the working class, capitalism also pushes the working class onto the arena of struggle. In the past weeks,
creates its own gravediggers.
It creates its own gravediggers and spurs them onto the revolutionary struggle. Most working class people don't want to have a revolution. Who wants to do a revolution? It's costly, it's risky, there's slim chances of success, and people want to try everything before they get to that. However, this system again and again pushes people beyond that line, where they snap, not in a resigned manner as in Ukraine. Although in Ukraine you also see a class backlash now inside of the country. But it pushes people to snap and to take on the path of struggle, to take their destinies into their own hands. In the past weeks, we've seen this in Greece. We've seen this in Serbia, with hundreds of thousands of people protesting against the governments. We've seen this in Turkey, which we unfortunately didn't have time to comment on today. We see even the very, very early kind of embryonic stages of the development of such things in Israel, driven by the war. We see the element of class hatred and class anger in Ukraine. All of this does
in the United States.
In the United States, which because of a lack of a clear working class expression was partially reflected in the election of Trump. But even now, within this society, you're going to see reflections of it both against Trump and within the Trump movement.
And if I may say, in Argentina, even in the last few weeks, there's been a brutal repression of pensioners, and this has now led to a big demonstration at the weekend on the 24th of March, which is the anniversary of the dictatorship. But now there's a plan for a national demonstration in support of the pensioners. I think it's on the 9th of April, and then on the 10th of April, there's a general strike called by the trade union bureaucracy. They couldn't do anything. They had to put themselves at the forefront of this movement.
There you go. So without any communist organization, without any program or party or leadership, the working class is spurred on to move by the system itself. And as it moves, it begins gradually to conceive its own interests, its own power, and the real state of play in society that is being exploited, that is being oppressed by an opposing class, which is that of the capitalists. The only thing missing in this equation is a leadership that can organize and galvanize all of this power of the working class, all of this dissatisfaction, which reflects itself in all sorts of ways. Some people are dissatisfied with the disability payments being taken. Some people are overexploited at work. Some people are thrown into war. Some people have, the system oppresses everyone in different ways. Nevertheless, all of these reflect the inability of the system to take humanity forward. And in order the role of the party is precisely to reach that final conclusion that the starting point of all of these processes eventually lead to. And that's that's why we're having these shows. That's why we're building the Revolutionary Communist International. And that is what is necessary to build in order to prepare for the enormous class struggles which are being prepared in every single country all around the world. Should we end it there?
That seems like a very good conclusion.
Any last comments?
No, that's fine.
Okay, very good. We'll end it there. This was Against the Street. This was Against the Stream. I'm Hamid Alizadeh. I was here today with Jorge Martin. We'll be back again next Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time.